The wine glass trembled in my hand as I watched my wife Candace laugh at another one of Marco's jokes. Not because it was funny, Marco Castellani had the comedic timing of a tax audit, but because she was performing. The same laugh she'd practiced in our bathroom mirror before charity events, the one that made her sound like she belonged in his world of hedge funds and Italian leather shoes. "So, Eli," Marco said, turning his predatory smile toward me, "Candace tells me you're in computers. Like, fixing them when they break?" The entire table at Romano's, the kind of restaurant where they don't put prices on the menu because, if you have to ask, you can't afford it, turned to look at me. Candace's parents, Richard and Patricia, with their matching expressions of polite disappointment. Her sister Sabrina, wide-eyed and eager to please as always. Even Veronica, Candace's college friend who'd somehow made a career out of being provocative at expensive restaurants. IT consulting, I corrected, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than most people's car payments. I help companies protect their data from people who think a firewall is something you build in your backyard. Marco's laugh was sharp and dismissive. Right. So, like, when the printer won't work, they call you? I could feel Candace's tension from across the table. Not embarrassment for Marco's rudeness. Embarrassment for me. For my blue-collar roots showing through the expensive shirt she'd bought me for occasions like this. "Something like that," I said quietly, watching as Marco's hand brushed against Candace's when he reached for his glass. A brief touch, but intimate. Familiar. The kind of touch that told a story. "Well, someone has to keep the world running," Patricia said with the kind of forced politeness that made it clear she thought that someone should be invisible while doing it. Marco leaned back in his chair, his Rolex catching the restaurant's dim lighting. Everything about him screamed new money, the kind of guy who'd grown up middle class in New Jersey and now pretended he'd summered in the Hamptons his whole life. "Actually, Eli, maybe you can help me out," Marco said, his voice taking on that tone rich people use when they're about to ask for a favor they expect for free. "I've been having some issues with my home network. The smart house system keeps acting up." "I'm sure Eli would be happy to take a look," Candace said quickly, before I could respond. "Wouldn't you, honey?" The endearment felt like a knife twist. When had she started calling me honey in public? When had she started volunteering my services to her friends? When had I become the family's pet IT guy, trotted out to fix rich people's problems? "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "Though I should mention, I charge $200 an hour for house calls." The silence that followed was deafening. Marco's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "200? Jesus, Eli, you should be running Goldman Sachs with rates like that." More laughter from the table. Even Sabrina giggled, though she looked apologetic about it. Only Mrs. Halverson, the elderly woman at the neighboring table who'd been shamelessly eavesdropping, seemed to approve of my response. She raised her water glass slightly in my direction. "Market rates," I said simply. "Supply and demand." "Well, maybe we can work out a family discount," Marco said, winking at Candace, "since we're practically family now." The words hit like a physical blow. Practically family. I watched Candace's face, looking for confusion, for offense, for any sign that she found his presumption as inappropriate as I did. Instead, she blushed. "Marco's been such a good friend to our family," she said, her voice soft and warm in a way it hadn't been when she'd spoken to me all evening. "He helped Sabrina find her apartment, and he's been giving me advice on some of my bigger real estate deals." "Just trying to help out where I can," Marco said, his hand finding Candace's shoulder in what anyone else might have mistaken for a friendly gesture. But I saw the way his thumb traced a small circle against her collarbone. Saw the way she leaned into the touch just slightly. "How generous," I said, my voice flat. The dinner continued with the same painful rhythm. Marco dominating the conversation with stories about his latest investment wins, Candace hanging on every word, her family treating me like a piece of furniture that occasionally made inappropriate noises. When the check came, Marco made a great show of reaching for his wallet before Richard waved him off. "My treat," the older man said, though I noticed he didn't look at me when he said it, like he was paying for 6 dinners instead of 7. As we stood to leave, Marco pulled Sabrina aside for what looked like an intimate conversation. She nodded eagerly at whatever he was saying, her face bright with excitement. Young, trusting Sabrina, who still believed the world was full of good people with pure intentions. "Ready to go?" Candace asked, appearing at my elbow with her purse clutched tightly in her manicured hands. "More than ready." We walked to our cars in the kind of silence that felt like a held breath. Marco's Porsche gleamed under the parking lot lights, a silver testament to everything I wasn't. My Honda Accord looked apologetic, parked next to it. "That was nice," Candace said as we reached our car, but her voice was distracted. She was looking back toward the restaurant, where Marco was still talking to her sister. "Was it?" She turned to me then, her expression sharp. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just making conversation." "You were rude to him, Eli. Marco was trying to be friendly, and you acted like he was beneath you." The irony was so thick I could have served it for dessert. "I acted like he was beneath me?" "You know what I mean. The comment about your rates, the attitude, he was trying to include you." "By mocking my job?" "He was making conversation. Not everything is a personal attack." I unlocked the car and held the passenger door open for her, a gesture that had once been automatic and romantic, but now felt like a hollow performance. "You're right. I'm sure he's just being friendly." As I walked around to the driver's side, I caught sight of Mrs. Halverson getting into her own car. She met my eyes through the windshield and shook her head slowly, the universal gesture of an elderly woman who'd seen this story play out before. The drive home was quiet, except for the sound of Candace's phone buzzing with text messages. She read each one with the kind of focus she used to reserve for looking at me. "Marco wants to take Sabrina to that new gallery opening downtown," she said, her voice carefully casual. "Isn't that sweet?" "Incredibly sweet." "You don't have to say it like that." "Like what?" "Like you don't believe it." I pulled into our driveway, the motion sensor lights flooding our front yard with harsh white light. Our house looked smaller somehow, less impressive than it had when we'd left, like seeing it through Marco's eyes had diminished it. "I believe he wants to take your sister somewhere," I said, turning off the engine. "The question is why." Candace's hand froze on the door handle. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Forget I said anything." But as we walked up to our front door, I couldn't shake the image of Marco's hand on her shoulder. The familiar way he'd touched her, the ease with which she'd accepted it. And I couldn't stop thinking about the text messages that had kept her attention for the entire drive home. 3 days later, I was in my office trying to focus on a security audit for a local bank when Scott knocked on my door. Scott Martinez had been my business partner for 5 years, and my best friend for longer than that. Ex-Marine, built like a linebacker, with the kind of straightforward honesty that made him terrible at poker and invaluable as a friend. "You look like hell," he said, dropping into the chair across from my desk with his usual lack of ceremony. "Good morning to you too." "I'm serious, man. When's the last time you slept? And don't say last night because I can see the coffee stains on yesterday's shirt." I looked down at my shirt, which was indeed yesterday's shirt and indeed had coffee stains. "I've been working." "On what?" "The Morrison account doesn't need the report until Friday." "Other things." Scott leaned forward, his expression shifting from casual concern to focused attention. It was the same look he'd had in Afghanistan when he was trying to determine if a situation was about to go sideways. "What kind of other things?" I turned my laptop screen toward him. For the past 3 days, I'd been doing what I do best, digging into data. Credit card records, phone bills, social media activity, digital footprints, the kind of information that tells you everything about a person's life if you know how to read it. Jesus, Eli. Is this what I think it is? Depends what you think it is. I think you're investigating your wife. The words hung in the air between us like smoke. Saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it hadn't. I'm investigating some inconsistencies in our household expenses, I said carefully. Inconsistencies. Hotel charges on her credit card, restaurants I've never been to, purchases that don't match her usual patterns. Scott scrolled through the data I'd compiled, his expression growing darker with each screen. This is from the Marriott downtown, 3 different dates last month. All days when she said she was showing properties to out-of-town clients. And this restaurant charge? Romano's. The night before we went there as a family. She had dinner there with someone else first. Scott sat back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Eli, man, you need to talk to her. Directly. This detective shit isn't healthy. I tried talking to her. She said I was being paranoid. Are you being paranoid? I pulled up another screen, phone records showing dozens of calls to a number I'd traced back to Marco Castellani. Calls that lasted hours, made at times when she'd told me she was in meetings or showing houses. You tell me. Scott stared at the screen for a long moment. Bastard. Yeah. How long has this been going on? Based on the data? About 4 months. But I think it started earlier than that. I just didn't have digital evidence from before then. What are you going to do? It was a good question. The old me, the me from 6 months ago, would have confronted Candace directly, would have laid out the evidence and demanded an explanation, would have believed that our marriage was worth fighting for. But that version of me hadn't sat through dinner at Romano's watching his wife flirt with another man, hadn't watched her family treat him like an embarrassment, hadn't seen the way she looked at Marco like he was everything she'd ever wanted. I'm going to get more evidence. Eli, I'm going to get enough evidence that when this comes out, no one can pretend it didn't happen. No one can make excuses or claim it was a misunderstanding. Scott was quiet for a moment, studying my face. This isn't about saving your marriage, is it? No, it's not. What about Sabrina? She's dating this guy, right? She's going to get caught in the crossfire. The thought of Sabrina, sweet, trusting Sabrina, who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings, was the only thing that gave me pause. She didn't deserve to have her world blown apart because her sister was a cheating narcissist and her boyfriend was a predator, but she also didn't deserve to be lied to. She'll find out eventually, I said. Better to find out now than after she's more invested. And you're sure about this? About what you're seeing? I pulled up one more file, a folder full of photographs I'd taken 2 nights ago when I'd followed Candace to what she'd claimed was a late-night property showing. Photos of her and Marco in the parking lot of the Marriott, his hands in her hair, her body pressed against his car. Scott looked at the photos and swore softly. I'm sorry, man. I'm really sorry. Don't be sorry, be helpful. I need someone to watch my back while I figure out how to handle this. What do you need? First, I need to know more about Marco. His business, his finances, his vulnerabilities. If I'm going to blow up my life, I'm taking him down with me. Scott nodded grimly. What else? I need to document everything. Every lie, every secret meeting, every time she chooses him over me. When this comes out, I want the record to be crystal clear. You're talking about scorched earth. I'm talking about the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from Candace. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. I showed the message to Scott, who checked his watch. It was barely noon. Let me guess, he said. She's showing a property. Always showing properties these days. Scott stood up, his expression grim but determined. All right. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. But Eli, once we start down this road, there's no going back. You sure you're ready for what comes next? I looked at the photos on my screen one more time. Candace laughing at something Marco had whispered in her ear, her face bright with happiness, I hadn't seen in months. The same happiness she used to have when she looked at me. I'm ready. Then let's get to work. The evidence accumulated like snow in a blizzard, slowly at first, then all at once, until it was impossible to ignore. Credit card statements showing charges at hotels and restaurants I'd never been to. Phone records revealing hours-long conversations with Marco at times when Candace had claimed to be in client meetings. Social media posts that didn't match her supposed whereabouts. But it was the discovery of the second phone that broke something inside me. I found it by accident, tucked into the pocket of a coat she rarely wore. A cheap, prepaid phone with months of text messages between her and Marco. Messages that made it clear this wasn't just an affair. It was a complete, alternate life. "Can't wait to be done with this charade," she'd written just 3 days ago. "Playing happy wife is exhausting." Marco's response: "Soon, baby. Once Sabrina and I are more serious, it'll be easier to explain why we're spending so much time together. Family, friends, and all that. You're using my sister. We're using your sister. There's a difference. Besides, she's sweet. I might actually keep her around for a while. Don't get attached. We have a plan. Relax. The plan is solid. Eli's too stupid to figure it out, and by the time anyone else does, we'll be long gone." I sat in my car outside a Starbucks, reading months of messages that detailed not just their affair, but their systematic plan to destroy my life. How they'd been working together to isolate me from our social circle, making me look paranoid and controlling. How Marco had been deliberately provoking me at social events, then playing the victim when I reacted. How they'd been planning to frame me for domestic violence so Candace could divorce me and take everything. The worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was how stupid they thought I was. How confident they were that I'd never figure it out. My phone rang. "Scott." "Where are you?" he asked without preamble. "Starbucks on Main Street. Why?" "Because your wife just called my office looking for you. Said you missed a lunch date." I checked my calendar. No lunch date. "What did you tell her?" "That you were out on a client call. But Eli, she sounded worried. Like genuinely concerned, worried. She's performing. She knows I'm getting suspicious, so she's ramping up the loving wife act. Maybe. Or maybe she actually cares about you and is having second thoughts." I almost laughed. "Scott, I'm looking at text messages where she calls being married to me a charade, where she and Marco joke about how stupid I am, where they plan to destroy my life for insurance money and my business assets." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Insurance money?" Scott finally said. "Life insurance. They've been researching ways to make my death look accidental." "Jesus Christ, Eli. You need to go to the police." "With what? Text messages on a phone I obtained illegally? Photos I took while stalking my wife? They'd laugh me out of the station." "Then what's your plan?" I looked across the street at the real estate office where Candace worked, her BMW parked in its usual spot. She was in there right now, probably texting Marco about how she couldn't find me, how I was acting strange, how they might need to accelerate their timeline. I'm going to beat them at their own game. What does that mean? It means I'm done being the victim in this story. That evening, I sat in our living room, waiting for Candace to come home from another late client meeting. The house felt different now that I knew the truth, less like a home and more like a stage set for a play I hadn't known I was performing in. When she finally walked through the door at 9:30, she looked genuinely surprised to see me sitting in the dark. "Eli, why are you sitting in the dark?" I turned on the lamp beside my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "Just thinking." "About what?" She set down her purse and walked over to kiss my cheek, a gesture that once would have been automatic and welcome, but now felt like a performance. "About us. About our marriage. About what we want our future to look like." Something flickered in her eyes, fear, maybe, or calculation. That's a pretty heavy topic for a Wednesday night. Is it? When's the last time we talked about our future, Candace? Really talked about it? She sat down on the couch across from me, her posture careful and controlled. We talk all the time. Do we? Because I feel like we've been living parallel lives lately. You're always working, I'm always working. We barely see each other except at family dinners and social events. That's what marriage is, Eli. It's not all romance and candlelit dinners. People grow up, they get busy with their careers. Is that what this is? Growing up? What else would it be? I studied her face, looking for any sign of guilt or remorse. Instead, I saw the same polished composure she wore to client meetings and charity events. I don't know, I said finally. You tell me. We stared at each other across the coffee table, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, she stood up. I'm tired, Eli. It's been a long day. Can we continue this conversation tomorrow? Of course. Sweet dreams. She paused at the bottom of the stairs, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I love you, she said, the words sounding like a question. I love you too, I replied, and for the first time in our marriage, I was lying. After she went upstairs, I sat in the dark for another hour, listening to the sounds of her getting ready for bed, the shower running, the hairdryer, the familiar routine of a woman preparing for sleep, or preparing for another late-night phone call with her lover. At midnight, I heard her voice through the ceiling, soft and muffled, but unmistakably warm in a way it hadn't been when she'd spoken to me. I pulled out my own phone and called Scott. It's time, I said when he answered. Time for what? Time to show everyone who they really are. The plan came together like a well-orchestrated symphony, each piece falling into place with the kind of precision that only comes from intimate knowledge of your target's weaknesses. Marco's weakness was his ego. He couldn't resist showing off, couldn't pass up an opportunity to prove he was smarter, richer, better than everyone else in the room. Candace's weakness was her image. Everything she did was calculated to maintain her reputation as the perfect wife, the successful realtor, the woman who had it all together. Their shared weakness was their absolute certainty that I was too stupid and too trusting to figure out what they were doing. They were about to learn how wrong they were. You sure about this? Scott asked as we sat in his truck outside the country club where Candace's parents were hosting their monthly charity dinner. Once we do this, there's no taking it back. I'm sure. And you're okay with collateral damage? Because Sabrina's going to be devastated. I thought about sweet, naive Sabrina, who still believed in true love and happy endings, who had no idea that her boyfriend was using her as cover for an affair with her sister. Sabrina deserves better than being lied to, I said. She deserves to know the truth about the people in her life. Scott nodded grimly. All right, let's do this. The country club was exactly what you'd expect from a place where Candace's parents felt comfortable, all dark wood paneling and oil paintings of dead rich people. The kind of place where they served drinks that cost more than most people's car payments, and everyone pretended to care about charity while really just wanting to see and be seen. I found Candace near the bar, holding court with a group of her real estate colleagues. She looked stunning in a black cocktail dress that I'd bought her for our anniversary, her smile bright and practiced as she told some story that had everyone laughing. Eli! She called out when she saw me, her voice warm with what anyone else would have mistaken for genuine affection. I was wondering where you were. Traffic, I said, accepting the kiss she placed on my cheek. You look beautiful. Thank you. She turned back to her colleagues. Everyone, you know my husband Eli. He's the computer genius I'm always talking about. More polite smiles and handshakes. I played my part, making small talk about network security and data protection while keeping one eye on the room. Marco was by the windows, deep in conversation with Sabrina and her parents. He looked every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and Italian shoes, his hand resting possessively on Sabrina's lower back. "I should go say hello to your parents," I told Candace. "Of course. I'll catch up with you in a few minutes." I made my way across the room, stopping to chat with various acquaintances and family friends. Mrs. Halverson was there, as she always was at these events, her sharp eyes taking in everything and everyone. "Eli, dear," she said, catching my arm as I passed. "How are you holding up?" The question was loaded with meaning. Mrs. Halverson had lived in our neighborhood for 40 years. She'd seen marriages rise and fall, watched families tear themselves apart, observed the small dramas that played out behind closed doors. "I'm fine, Mrs. Halverson. Thank you for asking." "Are you? Because you look like a man carrying a heavy burden." I glanced around to make sure we weren't being overheard. "Some burdens are worth carrying." She nodded slowly, understanding passing between us. "Indeed they are. Just remember, dear, the truth has a way of coming out eventually, usually when people least expect it." "I'll keep that in mind." I continued across the room to where Marco was regaling Richard and Patricia with some story about his latest investment success. Sabrina hung on every word, her face bright with adoration. "Eli!" Marco boomed when he saw me, his voice carrying across the room. "There's the man of the hour. I was just telling everyone about this amazing opportunity I've got brewing." "Is that right?" "Cryptocurrency mining operation. Completely legitimate, fully regulated. I'm talking about returns that'll make your head spin." Richard leaned forward with interest. "What kind of returns?" "Conservative estimate? 20% annually, but I think we can do better than that." I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. 20% annually? That's impressive. "It's all about getting in early," Marco continued, his confidence building as he sensed an audience. "Most people don't understand the technology, so they're scared to invest. But guys like us, guys who understand innovation, we can make a killing." "Guys like us," I repeated. "Exactly. In fact, Eli, you should consider getting in on this. With your tech background, you'd understand the fundamentals better than most." Sabrina squeezed his arm excitedly. "Marco's been so generous, sharing these opportunities with our family. He really cares about helping people build wealth." "He certainly seems to," I said, meeting Marco's eyes directly. "Though I have to ask, if the returns are guaranteed to be so high, why do you need outside investors? Why not just invest your own money and keep all the profits?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marco's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. "Diversification," he said quickly. "Never put all your eggs in one basket, right? Plus, I like helping friends and family get ahead." "How altruistic of you." Patricia cleared her throat. "Well, it sounds fascinating, Marco. You'll have to send us some information." "Absolutely. In fact, I'm putting together a presentation for next week. Small group, just close friends and family. You should all come." "We'd love to," Sabrina said immediately. "Wouldn't miss it," I added, my smile widening. As the evening progressed, I watched Marco work the room like a professional con artist, which, I was beginning to realize, was exactly what he was. The cryptocurrency story was just the latest in a series of investment opportunities he'd been pitching to Candace's family and friends. And based on the phone records I'd uncovered, he'd been using information from Candace's real estate clients to target wealthy individuals for his schemes. By 10 o'clock, I had everything I needed. Marco had committed to his presentation, set a date and time, and invited everyone in Candace's social circle to attend. It was going to be a night to remember. "Ready to go?" Candace asked, appearing at my elbow as the evening wound down. "More than ready." As we walked to our car, I caught sight of Scott in the parking lot, giving me a subtle thumbs up. Phase 1 was complete. "That was a nice evening," Candace said as I started the engine. "It was. Marco seems excited about his new investment opportunity. He's always got something brewing. It's one of the things I admire about him, his entrepreneurial spirit." "Is that what you call it?" She looked at me sharply. What would you call it? I don't know yet, but I'm looking forward to finding out. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. While Candace spent her days showing properties and her evenings working late, I was busy setting up the most important presentation of Marco's life. Scott and I worked around the clock, digging deeper into Marco's background and business dealings. What we found was even worse than I'd expected. The man wasn't just a con artist, he was a serial con artist, with a trail of victims stretching back 5 years and 3 states. Look at this, Scott said, pulling up a news article on his laptop. Marco Castellani, formerly Michael Castellano, formerly Mike Castle. This guy's got more aliases than a CIA operative. I read over his shoulder. The article was from a small newspaper in New Jersey, detailing how a local investment advisor had disappeared with nearly $2 million of his client's money. That's our Marco? Same guy, different name, different hair color, but same fingerprints according to the police report I found. How is he not in prison? Because he's smart about it, never takes enough to trigger federal charges, always moves before local authorities can build a case, and he's got a talent for picking victims who are too embarrassed to report being conned. I stared at the screen, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. He's not just using Candace for an affair, he's using her to identify marks. Real estate clients with money to burn and more ego than sense. And she's helping him. Scott pulled up another file. Bank records showing regular deposits into an account Candace had opened 6 months ago. An account I'd never known existed. She's getting a cut of every con, 20% of whatever he brings in. The betrayal was so complete, so calculating, that I almost had to admire its thoroughness. My wife hadn't just fallen for another man. She'd become his business partner in fraud. There's more, Scott said, his voice grim. Remember those life insurance policies you mentioned? What about them? I did some digging. Candace increased your coverage 6 months ago, doubled it actually. And she's the sole beneficiary. The room seemed to tilt around me. She forged my signature? Looks like it. And get this, she also took out a policy on herself, with Marco as the beneficiary. But that one's only been active for a month. They're planning to kill both of us. That's what it looks like. Make it look like a murder-suicide, maybe. Grieving boyfriend and sister inherit everything. I sat back in my chair, trying to process the magnitude of what we'd uncovered. This wasn't just an affair or even a simple con game. This was a systematic plan to destroy my life and steal everything I'd worked for. We have to go to the police, Scott said. With what? Circumstantial evidence and theories? They're too smart to leave a paper trail for murder. Then what's the plan? I looked at the calendar on my desk. Marco's presentation was scheduled for tomorrow night at the country club. Everyone would be there. Candace's parents, Sabrina, their entire social circle. We give them exactly what they want, I said. What do you mean? Marco wants to put on a show, convince everyone he's a successful businessman with amazing investment opportunities. So we let him. I don't follow. I turned my laptop screen towards Scott, showing him the presentation I'd been working on for the past 3 days. We let him give his pitch, and then we give ours. Scott read through the slides, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to something approaching awe. You're going to destroy him. I'm going to destroy both of them, in front of everyone they care about, everyone they've been trying to impress. I'm going to show them exactly who they really are. This is nuclear, Eli. You understand that? After tomorrow night, there's no going back to your old life. My old life was a lie. I'm ready for a new one. That evening, I sat at our kitchen table, watching Candace prepare dinner with the same careful attention to detail she brought to everything else in her life. She moved around our kitchen like an actress playing a role, every gesture calculated for maximum effect. You seem excited about tomorrow night, she said, not looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. Do I? You've been different all week. More energetic. I'm looking forward to Marco's presentation. It sounds like an amazing opportunity. She glanced at me then, something unreadable in her expression. You're not usually interested in investment opportunities. I'm not usually invited to exclusive presentations by successful hedge fund managers. Marco's not a hedge fund manager. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and I saw the moment she realized her mistake. I thought he was. I mean, he manages investments. But not for a hedge fund. He's independent. Ah, that makes sense. We finished dinner in relative silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As she cleaned up, I watched her move around our kitchen and tried to remember when I'd stopped loving her and started studying her like a specimen under a microscope. Eli? She said suddenly. Yes. Do you ever think about what our life would be like if things were different? Different how? If we'd made different choices, taken different paths. I considered the question seriously. Sometimes. Do you? All the time. She turned to face me, her expression more vulnerable than I'd seen it in months. Do you think we're happy? It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. The old me would have rushed to reassure her, would have said whatever she needed to hear to make that vulnerable look disappear. The new me just looked at her steadily and said, Are you? She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. I should get some work done, I said, standing up from the table. Of course. I'll probably turn in early. Big day tomorrow. Big day, I agreed. As I walked toward my office, I heard her phone buzz with a text message, then another, then a third. Marco, no doubt, making final preparations for tomorrow's performance. I closed my office door and opened my laptop, reviewing my own presentation one last time. Every slide was perfect. Every piece of evidence carefully documented and verified. Tomorrow night, the truth would finally come out, and everyone would see exactly who they'd been dealing with. The country club's main dining room had been transformed for Marco's presentation. He'd rented professional audio-visual equipment, set up a projector screen, and arranged the tables in perfect rows facing the front of the room. Everything about the setup screamed legitimacy and success. I arrived early, ostensibly to help with setup, but really to make sure my own preparations were in place. Scott was already there, dressed in his best suit and playing the role of my business partner and technical support. Everything ready? I asked quietly. Ready as it'll ever be. You sure you want to do this? I looked around the room at the people filtering in. Candace's parents, her colleagues from the real estate office, family friends who'd known me for years. By the end of the night, they'd all see me differently. Some would be sympathetic, others would be horrified, but none of them would ever look at me the same way again. I'm sure. Candace arrived with Sabrina and Marco, the three of them looking like something out of a magazine spread. Marco had outdone himself with a navy suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, while Candace wore a red dress that made her look like a movie star. Eli! Marco called out, crossing the room with his arms spread wide. Thanks for coming early to help set up. I really appreciate the support. Wouldn't miss it. I have to say, I'm a little nervous. It's been a while since I've done a formal presentation like this. You'll do fine. Just be yourself. Something flickered in his eyes at that, but his smile never wavered. Right. Just be myself. As the room filled up, I made my rounds, greeting people and making small talk. Mrs. Halverson was there, of course, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She caught my eye across the room and nodded slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed both support and anticipation. At 7:30 sharp, Marco took his place at the front of the room, his presentation remote in hand and his most charming smile on display. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. I know you're all busy people, so I appreciate you taking the time to hear about this exciting opportunity. The presentation was masterful, I had to admit. Marco walked through slides showing impressive returns, testimonials from satisfied investors, and projections that would make anyone's mouth water. He spoke with the confidence of a man who'd given this pitch dozens of times before, which, as I well knew, he had. "Now, I know what some of you are thinking," Marco continued, clicking to a slide titled, "Too Good to Be True." "These returns seem almost impossible, but that's because most people don't understand the cryptocurrency mining market." He launched into a technical explanation that sounded impressive, but was actually complete nonsense, the kind of jargon designed to confuse rather than inform. I watched the audience nod along, their eyes glazing over as he threw around terms like blockchain optimization and quantum mining protocols. "The bottom line," Marco said, building to his crescendo, "is that we have a limited window of opportunity here. I can only take on a select number of investors, and I need commitments tonight." He clicked to his final slide, showing minimum investment amounts that started at $50,000. The room was silent for a moment, then erupted in excited chatter. I watched Candace beam with pride, her hand finding Marco's arm in a gesture that was supposed to look like friendly support, but clearly meant much more. "Are there any questions?" Marco asked. Several hands went up. Marco fielded them expertly, deflecting anything too specific while reinforcing his key talking points. He was good at this. Really good. Finally, when the questions died down, I raised my hand. "Yes, Eli? I have a few technical questions, if you don't mind." "Of course, fire away." I stood up, pulling out my own presentation remote. Actually, I prepared a few slides of my own, just to help clarify some of the technical aspects for everyone. Marco's smile faltered slightly. That's very thoughtful, but I think I've covered the technical side pretty thoroughly." "Oh, I'm sure you have, but as the resident computer expert, I thought I might be able to add some context." I clicked my remote, and my first slide appeared on the screen. "Investment fraud, red flags to watch for." The room went dead silent. "You see," I continued, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet, "Marco's presentation reminded me of something I learned in my cybersecurity training. Scammers often use technical jargon to confuse their victims and make their schemes sound more legitimate than they actually are." Marco's face had gone pale, but he was still trying to maintain his composure. "Eli, I'm not sure this is the appropriate time." "Oh, but it is." I clicked to my next slide, which showed a photo of Marco from a New Jersey newspaper article. Especially when the person giving the presentation has a documented history of investment fraud. Gasps echoed around the room. Sabrina's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "That's not me," Marco said quickly. "That's someone else with a similar name." "Is it?" I clicked again, showing a comparison of facial recognition analysis. Because facial recognition software says there's a 99.7% probability that Marco Castellani and Michael Castellano are the same person. "This is ridiculous," Marco said, his voice rising. "I don't have to listen to this." "Actually, you do," I said calmly, "because I'm not finished." I clicked through slide after slide, each one more damning than the last. Bank records showing Marco's pattern of taking money and disappearing. Police reports from 3 different states. Testimonials from victims who'd lost their life savings to his schemes. "But the really interesting part," I continued, "is how he's been using inside information from local real estate transactions to target his victims." I clicked to a slide showing Candace's client list, alongside a list of Marco's previous investment targets. The overlap was unmistakable. "It turns out having a girlfriend in real estate is quite useful when you're looking for people with money to steal." The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting questions, Sabrina was crying, and Marco was backing toward the exit. But I wasn't done. "And then there's this," I said, clicking to show the text messages I'd found on Candace's secret phone. The messages appeared on the screen in all their damning detail, including the ones where they'd discussed using Sabrina as cover for their affair. Sabrina's cry of anguish cut through the noise like a knife. Or this, I continued relentlessly, showing the insurance policies and their suspicious timing. By now, Marco had reached the door, but Scott was standing there, his arms crossed and his expression making it clear that leaving wasn't an option. "The police are already on their way," I announced. "I contacted them this afternoon with all of this evidence." As if summoned by my words, Detective Rowell appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. "Marco Castellani," Detective Rowell said, "you're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud." The next few minutes were a blur of handcuffs and Miranda rights. Marco went quietly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. As they led him away, he caught my eye one last time. "You have no idea what you've done," he said. "I know exactly what I've done," I replied. After the police left with Marco, the room slowly began to empty. People filed out in small groups, their voices hushed and their expressions shocked. Some stopped to offer me words of support or condolence, but most just wanted to escape the scene of such spectacular devastation. Finally, only family remained. Candace sat alone at a table near the front, her face buried in her hands. Sabrina was being comforted by her parents, her tears having given way to a kind of numb shock. I walked over to where Candace sat and took the seat across from her. "How long have you known?" she asked without looking up. "About the affair? Months? About the fraud? About a week? Are you going to have me arrested too?" "That's up to the police. But yes, I gave them evidence of your involvement." She finally looked at me then, her makeup streaked with tears and her perfect composure completely shattered. "I never meant for it to go this far," she said. "Yes, you did. You meant for it to go exactly this far. The only thing you didn't plan on was getting caught." She opened her mouth to argue, then seemed to think better of it. "What happens now?" she asked. I stood up, straightening my jacket. "Now you face the consequences of your choices." As I walked toward the exit, Mrs. Halverson intercepted me near the door. "That was quite a presentation, dear," she said. "Thank you." "How do you feel?" It was a good question. I'd expected to feel triumphant, vindicated, satisfied with my revenge. Instead, I mostly felt tired. "Like I can finally get a good night's sleep," I said. She patted my arm gently. "The truth has a way of setting us free, doesn't it? Even when it's painful. Especially when it's painful." I walked out into the cool night air, where Scott was waiting by his truck. "So," he said, "how does it feel to blow up your entire life in front of 50 people? I considered the question as we walked to our cars. Behind us, the country club was quiet, except for the sound of staff cleaning up the wreckage of Marco's presentation. "Like the best decision I've ever made," I said finally. And for the first time in months, I meant it. 3 months later, I was sitting in my office when Scott knocked on the door. "You've got a visitor," he said, stepping aside to reveal Detective Rowell. "Detective, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Just wanted to give you an update on the Castellani case. Thought you'd be interested to know he pled guilty to 12 counts of fraud. He'll be going away for a long time." "And Candace?" "Cooperated with the investigation. She'll do some jail time, but not as much as she could have. Her lawyer worked out a deal." I nodded. "Thank you for letting me know." Detective Rowell turned to leave, then paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How did you know? I mean, what made you start investigating in the first place?" I thought about that night at Romano's, watching Marco's hand on Candace's shoulder, seeing the way she looked at him. "Instinct," I said, "and the fact that my wife started calling me honey in public." Detective Rowell laughed. "Honey?" She'd never done that before. When someone changes their behavior that dramatically, there's usually a reason. "Well, your instincts were right. We found evidence linking Castellani to fraud schemes in 6 states. You probably saved a lot of people from losing their life savings." After he left, I sat alone in my office, looking out the window at the small Maine town I'd called home for the past 10 years. It looked the same as always, but everything felt different now. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you." I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations were better left unfinished. Scott appeared in my doorway again. "So, what now?" "Now we get back to work. We've got clients to serve and a business to run." "That's it? After everything that's happened, you just want to go back to normal?" I looked around my office, at the awards on the wall, the photos of successful projects, the evidence of a life built through hard work and honest dealing. "This is normal," I said. "This is real. Everything else was just a very expensive education." Scott grinned. "Well, when you put it that way." As he headed back to his own office, I opened my laptop and got back to work. Outside, the sun was shining, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sound of construction, someone building something new, where something old had been torn down. It seemed like the perfect metaphor for starting over.